Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barbara Jennings at Towne Benefits, and you are here for a webinar on preparing and maintaining job descriptions. And I welcome you. And again, my name is Barbara Jennings, and I am a human resources consultant with Towne Benefits. And my background, I spent about 33 years in human resources management and retired, I'm using air quotes when I say that, about 11 years ago, and I joined TFA Benefits originally as an insurance agent and now as an HR consultant. Pretty much my whole career I've spent in either banking or law, and in a role, generally speaking, that was in human resources. So I welcome you and very much appreciate your being here today, and want to let you know that we will be sending slides and the recording out after the webinar. Probably take us a couple of days to get that all together to get to you, but that will be on its way shortly. So when you registered for this webinar, you may have seen a different title. You may not notice now that you're seeing the screen that I did a little title swap there, because I heard a quote one day not long ago about job descriptions, and the person said that job descriptions are the mother of all HR processes. And I thought, oh, that is a great quote. Because really, when you think about it, your basis for recruiting, hiring, evaluating, compensating, firing, just everything that ends in ing, all of that springs from the same source, really, and that is your job descriptions. And so that's where we are today, here to talk about job descriptions, and that's why I made that little change of title. So let's get started. All right, so first we have to do our little disclaimer, and that is to let you know that this information that we're presenting is subject to change. That is by the Department of Labor, the IRS, the CDC, HHS, and also to sort of let you know that this is a year, probably not just this year, but last year and this year, where we experienced a number of changes in the HR world. The Supreme Court came down with a couple of decisions that have the potential to affect us. And then anytime you have a presidential change, you always have the potential for things to change. So just want to make you aware of that things we're talking about are good today, but they may change over the course of this year. And then in addition to that, there can be technical directions and that sort of thing that come down that tweak stuff that makes changes that can affect us. And this information that I'm presenting today should not be construed as legal or tax advice in any way. I am not a lawyer and I'm not a tax accountant, and this is purely for your information. And anytime you've got an issue, you need to contact your professional advisor. All right, so how do you describe how most of us feel about job descriptions? I think this quote pretty much sums it up. Writing job descriptions has been the most rewarding aspect of my career in HR, said no one ever. But job descriptions are important, and so we can't ignore them. And if you're like me, I know in my HR career, it was so easy at that time. We were still paper focused to just have a binder on the back shelf that you dusted off every once in a while and looked at. And it just became very difficult to move job descriptions up to the priority that they really are. And so that's what we're here to talk about today, is some common practice on how to make job descriptions kind of doable, and then how to maintain them, and then some other information that I think that you're going to find helpful. So, sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty with, there we are. So here's some job description facts that you may not be aware of. First of all, no state or federal law requires a company to have job descriptions. That may be surprising to some people, but there's not going to be the job description squad that swoops in on you and wants to take a look at your job descriptions, because you're just not required to have those. If you do have them, there is no standard format for job descriptions, obviously, because there's no requirement to have them. But while there are things that should be included, you as the employer, you're really free to kind of come up with the format, the length, the wording and that sort of thing. I do go into detail here in a minute about how to actually draft your job descriptions, but all of this that I'm about to tell you in terms of formatting and wording, a lot of that is just my personal preference, and I do base my preferences on what I feel like is pretty solid information. But no, you have leeway to kind of do what you want to do with your job descriptions. The length of the job description is less important than the information that it contains, and that might be kind of a duh moment. But the job descriptions, the actual relevance to the job, that's what's really important. So that makes it useful, and that makes it reliable in a number of different ways. And some job descriptions can be pretty short, while others need to be longer because you've got more detail, you have just more information that you're trying to impart. And so if your job descriptions vary in length depending on the job, don't worry about that very much, because that's going to be normal. All right, now you don't have to have job descriptions, but I've got 3 reasons why you probably should have job descriptions. For one thing, a job description is a recruiting tool. Okay, so when you are out there trying to find new employees, you need every tool at your disposal that you can actually put your hands on. And so your job description, right off the bat, when someone sees your job posting, your job description can answer some questions for them, like, am I qualified to do this job? Am I interested in this job? Do I know who this company is? And that sort of thing. So, people can screen themselves out if they read the qualifications and go, well, I'm nowhere near qualified for that, so I'm just not going to bother. Or this just doesn't really sound like anything I'm interested in. That saves you time. It saves them time. And so that's why posting a job description out there when you run an ad is probably a good idea. The second thing is your job descriptions tell employees about the job they're doing. So, what am I expected to do in this job? What about my performance review? Is that going to be measured against what's described in the job description? So those are important things for the employee to know. They can know kind of what target they're aiming at in terms of, doing their job well and getting a good performance review. All right, now we have some practical uses of job descriptions. So first of all, a job description ensures that everyone, supervisors, employees, applicants, that they all have the same information about the job. Nobody has any misunderstanding about what this job consists of, what the requirements are, and that sort of thing. The job description helps ensure that performance evaluations are objective and fair. So every employee in that occupies that same job should be evaluated pretty much on the same criteria. Job description can be used as a tool when you establish exempt versus non-exempt status of the job. And at the end of this presentation, I am going to go into some explanations of the difference between exempt and non-exempt. Over the course of the years that I've been dealing with clients in a consulting capacity, I have sensed some confusion out there about what does exempt and non-exempt mean. So I thought I would just take a few minutes to explain that today while we're talking about job descriptions. Job descriptions aid in determining the relative value of jobs. When you're setting, if you do ranges and grades, pay grades and that sort of thing, if you've got solid job descriptions, that can help you kind of sort out what jobs deserve 10% more money or whatever. If you don't have the job description, it can just kind of make that job a little bit harder. The job description is essential in making determinations about reasonable accommodation requests. The job description is kind of an essential thread that pulls a lot of things together. And so reasonable accommodations has got to be one of those things that is considered when you're talking about having a good job description. Your job description can provide a defense for hiring and promotion decisions, as well as for approving and denying accommodation requests. So if you need a little list of reasons why you should have them, I just gave you that list. All right, now I'm going to pause for a little drink of water. All right, now let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what a job description should look like. And I actually do have a sample that's in this presentation, and I apologize in advance for those of you who are on smaller screens. It is going to be a little bit hard to read, but it's there, and we're going to talk about it step by step. And so when you get the slides, hopefully, if you need to print out just a single slide that has that job description on it that you want to be able to see better, hopefully you'll be able to do that. All right, so this, again, my preference, I like to include about 6 categories of information in a job description. And I'm going to go into detail about these in a minute. All right, so I like to put a little sentence about the company. Next, I like a quick overview of the job summary, summarize in 2 sentences what this job's reason for existence is. I like to then see the essential functions of the job, and then the non-essential functions, and then the requirements such as education, skills, and experience, and then characteristics of the job that people would want to know, what hours worked and that sort of thing. And so those 6 things I like to include. There's no set format or wording. The important part is what you're communicating. So again, if you like to mix those up a little bit, or if you want to add something or take something away, I will say that the essential functions and the non-essential functions are probably critical to have in there, and we'll talk about those reasons in a few minutes. But this is just generally what I like to see in a job application. Job description. Sorry about that. All right, so now I'm going to go into more detail about each one of those. All right, a little sentence about the company. That may seem kind of weird because you're thinking, well, gee, these are my job descriptions. My employees see this and read it, and they know about the company because they work here. But again, if you're going to use job descriptions in your recruiting efforts, my opinion is if you put a little blurb in there about the company, then you don't really need to have 2 sets of job descriptions, one for applicants and one for employees. You can just use one set, and then you only have to keep updated one set. All right, so for example, about the company, on the job description you're going to see in a minute, I put about us. Cease and Desisto, PLLC, is a small law firm located in southeastern Virginia that specializes in representing individuals in personal injury, medical malpractice, and employment law cases. I used a law job as my example because I spent 23 years in a law firm, and I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on what's required of a lot of those jobs. So anyway, you can see that's a very quick snapshot of what this company does, what this law firm does. And again, to save yourself time and to save applicants time, if they look at your job description, they could say, oh, well, I see that you say personal injury and medical malpractice, and that person could go, hey, I've done medical malpractice, and so this sounds like it might be a good fit, so I'm going to apply. Or another candidate may look at that and go, I really don't like personal injury, so I'm not interested. So that is, again, the reason why I like to put the about the company, just one little sentence in there. All right, so then the next category is going to be the job summary. If you've ever heard of an elevator speech, I don't know if you've ever heard anybody use that term before, but it's kind of a marketing thing where you develop some very short and succinct wording to describe something. Like if somebody said to you, what do you do in your job? You might be able to tell them in 1 or 2 sentences the essence of the job you do. Well, that is the job summary. And it's just a short description that gives an overview of the job that includes the major responsibilities. It may also point out that it's an exempt or a non-exempt job, may talk about how many people the person supervises and who the person reports to. So in my job description that I created, that you're going to see in a minute, I put the accounting manager. This is an accounting manager job, by the way. The accounting manager role is an exempt position that's responsible for the firm's accounting function, which includes the preparation of monthly accounting reports, and then goes into detail for just 1 minute about other essential items. And then it says that the role supervises the billing manager and 2 accounting clerks. So that's just a quick overview of what this job's reason for existence. Okay, now we get into the idea of essential functions. And the reason that we use that wording is because we had an act pass quite a number of years ago called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And under that act, employers are required to discuss reasonable accommodations for employees who may have a disability in order to determine if an accommodation that they're asking for is reasonable. And it's based on what the essential functions of the job are. So the bar is high for having it be an undue hardship. And so you have your essential functions spelled out. Those are the essential functions are the fundamental duties of a position, the things a person holding the job absolutely has to be able to do. Essential job functions are used to determine the rights of the employee under the ADA. Also helps to determine the internal value of the job, to have the list of essential functions. And as the name suggests, the essential functions are the fundamental, not marginal duties. All right. So again, the reasons this job exists. So the really, really easy, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, is the idea of an airline pilot. The reason that an airline pilot job exists is so someone can fly people from one place to another. So if someone desires to be an airline pilot, but they can't fly a plane, then they are not qualified to do the job. So that one's very easy. Most jobs that we encounter every day are not that clear-cut, and that's why we do essential functions. Another characteristic is that only a few employees can perform a specific essential function. So you might have, in an IT world, you might have a very intricate piece of software. In a factory, you might have a sensitive or highly expensive piece of machinery that only very few people know how to operate. That sort of machine operation or software knowledge could be considered an essential function of that job. And the function is so highly specialized that the employer hires people into a position specifically because of their expertise in performing that function. And again, at a very high level job, you could be talking about a brain surgeon, that only a few people can do this particular job. Anything surrounding the high specialization would be considered an essential function and the reason that job exists. So I hope that that makes sense, how critical it is to the job, the few number of people that might be able to do it, and that sort of thing. All right, so then by comparison, we'll talk for a minute about the non-essential functions. Non-essential functions can be easily performed by other employees. They're not critical to the job. They can be performed infrequently, or they're not highly specialized. And again, going back to the ADA and its requirements, when an employee asks you for an accommodation, you look at their essential functions, and your obligation is to discern if an employee can perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. And so what it comes down to is, if you can make an accommodation that's reasonable, that can enable the employee to do those essential functions, that means that you could end up having to perhaps reassign the non-essential functions, either permanently or temporarily. And so, you know, maybe this is kind of a silly example, but if you work in an office where, you know, everybody shares 2 or 3 printers, copiers, and so it's everybody's duty on that floor, let's say, to be mindful of restocking the paper, the toner, the ink, etc. And so everybody is expected to participate in doing that. Well, you have an employee who is due to deliver a baby in about 4 weeks. She comes to you and says, I'm having a real hard time bending over like that to pull the trays out and to put the paper in. And I'm wondering if until I give birth and then I come back to work, can I be relieved of that duty? So that would be a request for what would most certainly be a reasonable accommodation. And the employer would simply inform the rest of the staff on the floor, you know, Janie is not going to be restocking until she comes back from maternity leave. So that's making a reasonable accommodation. And again, most of the time, those things are not quite that easy or quite that cut and dried. But that's kind of an example of why you differentiate between essential and non-essential functions. All right, the next section would be your skills, education skills, and experience requirement. That in this space, I'm going to go back to my job description that I'm going to show you in a minute. Your education, for example, the accounting manager that I talked about a minute ago, a minimum education of a 2-year degree in accounting, that might be a requirement. An understanding and an advanced level of the preparation of accounting reports like income statements and balance sheets. High level experience with QuickBooks. So you kind of get the idea of what you're putting under that category. Education, skills, and experience requirements that you would like to see someone be able to do in this job. So so that's pretty straightforward. And then finally, you've got your job characteristics. And in this section, put anything that an applicant or employee needs to know. I would like to add here that when you're looking at your job descriptions, I think it's very helpful to kind of try to take off your employer administrator hat and put on your employee hat and think, what is it that I would like to know about this job if I were a prospective employee or an actual employee looking at this job description? And so including things like the hours and days that are required as work days, any overtime requirements, any travel requirements, whether it's hybrid, on-site, et cetera. Does it require a driver's license? Is there exposure to heat or cold? Do you have a dress code? And where's the job located? Is it here in the main office where the person's interviewing, or is it out in a different location? So again, anything you can fit in there that you think an employee or prospective employee might like to know about this job. Now, here is the picture of the job description. And I do again apologize if it's small and you can't see it very well. But you can see that I've got all my categories in there, and I've tried to fill them in with as much meaty information as possible. So again, I hope that you find that somewhat somewhat helpful. All right, so then the next section that we're going to go into is how do you actually develop job descriptions? And I'll warn you right from the beginning that I can kind of tell you how to develop your job descriptions in about probably 5 or 6 minutes, but this is where the real work is. This is where you have to spend a lot of time, and this is the point at which, you know, making your list of all your jobs and who the supervisors are or whatever in preparation is one thing, but when you get into the actual work and you have to roll up your sleeves and start doing the work, that is what is time consuming. So just beware. And sometimes job descriptions are better done in chunks. Like if you have 15 jobs in your company, say, okay, we're going to do 5 job descriptions every quarter for the first 3 quarters of 2025 or something like that, so that you can pace yourself and get them done and not try to, you know, I can tell you that if you try to hurry or cram everything in just in days or within a month, the job descriptions you prepare first are probably going to be better than the ones you prepare at the end, because I think you just flat out get tired of what you have to do to actually get the job descriptions developed. So here we go. Half the work of writing a job description comes before you actually start writing. So first, I want to share some information and some resources for you where you may find information that can be helpful for you as far as gathering information about the job. Yeah, the roadmap is pretty simple, but it's time consuming to get where you're going. So here are 5 resources that you may consider using. The first 2 are internal resources, and I strongly encourage you to talk to the employees in the job and talk to the supervisors about what they do. And that, to me, is your most valuable information. And talking to people serves a number of different functions. But before I go into too much detail about that, let me first say the way you may approach this, again, depending on, you may have jobs in your company where you only have 1 person that's in that job or 2 people. But if you've got a situation where you have multiple people in a single job, for example, if you're a bank and so you have a lot of tellers, you may have 25 tellers in your bank, I would suggest that you form a focus group and maybe select 4 or 5 of those tellers, maybe based on seniority, performance. If you know this person is their heart's in the job and they have a good attitude toward the company, form that little focus group for the purpose of helping you develop job descriptions, and then perhaps schedule 3 or 4 meetings, maybe even over lunch, where you provide everybody lunch and then you sit there for an hour, and in advance you give them a list of what you are trying to accomplish, so that they're thinking about their jobs, they're listing duties, they're listing things that they feel are essential to the job and less essential. And then, schedule your meetings. I would suggest that you schedule the meetings in advance so everybody knows, here are our 3 or 4 meetings and here are the dates that they're going to be. Give them a little space, maybe do 2 a month until you've got all your meetings accomplished. And then hopefully you will be able to make good progress in that amount of time. And then, have an agenda and tell these employees that you deeply appreciate them helping you with this. And you're going to get a lot of ideas and a lot of feedback, and just remind them you can't incorporate everything, but you can incorporate everything that is going to be useful to the project. And again, it doesn't mean that their information was bad, it just means we can't include everything. I think that employees overall like to be asked their opinions about things, and I found it very helpful in my own experience. I had teams of employees that helped me develop performance evaluation forms, and I found that to be a really good exercise. And it had a kind of a side effect that I never even thought about, and that was that those people, I think there were maybe 5 that helped, that they were very vested in that form. And so I never got any complaints from those people about the process or the form, because they had been asked for their input, and the response was they felt positive about the results because they had been part of it. All right, so then the next group of people internally would be the supervisors. Obviously, the supervisors are also employees, and so supervisors, eventually you're going to want 2 levels of information from them. You're going to want information about their own job, and then you're going to want information about the job of people that they supervise. So when you're working on the employee evals as employees, you're also going to want to ask those employees' supervisors to kind of go through the same exercise about filling in the essential functions, the less essential, and that sort of thing. So those are 2 really good resources to use in developing people's job descriptions. The next one, of course, is the internet. You can find out anything you want to know on the internet. How many times a day do I say, let me ask my friend Google, and I just Google away about all sorts of stuff. If I've ever spoken with you about an HR challenge that you're having, which I do on a daily basis with our clients, chances are good, if I don't know the answer off the top of my head, the first place I turn is Google. But always careful to make sure that whatever information I'm planning to use comes from a good source. But the internet is a great tool. I don't know how many of you have a trade association that you are involved with or could be involved with. When I worked for a law firm, we had an organization called the Association of Legal Administrators, and that was basically our trade association. That was absolutely enormously helpful. For one thing, they published information, and for a second thing, they were my peers here in Hampton Roads working, and I could call people and use them as resources. Say, hey, do you have a job description for a XYZ job? So if you have the ability to utilize trade association, that may be very helpful. I'm sure there's a range. Some are probably very large and very active. Some are probably less active. But I would certainly look into that. And then there's also a resource from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they have an occupational outlook handbook that also has a wealth of information about jobs and job descriptions. So those are 5 resources that you might consider using in your search for the perfect job description, as though there was such a thing. All right, Now, you've had your meetings, you've done your work, you've gotten a ton of feedback. And so now what do you do with it? Well, you kind of analyze everything, and using that information, you're going to summarize the job in about 2 sentences. Remember your elevator speech summary that you saw and that I mentioned. You're going to try to nail down your essential functions. You're going to try to identify your non-essential functions, and then your education experience, and then determine if the job is exempt or non-exempt based on the DOL's requirements. So I know, right? It took me 22 seconds to read that list, and it's going to take you a very long time to do these things, which is why I recommend that you spread this out and not kill yourself trying to hurry and get those job descriptions made. All right, and then you're going to prepare a draft. You're going to review the draft with the employees that participated in the process. You're going to review the draft with the supervisor, and then you're going to edit as necessary. You may need to go through this a couple of different times before you get it down to something that you feel is useful. And remember, you're kind of the boss, and so you have to make the decision when to cut it off, when to say, okay, I'm satisfied with the way it is. Thank you guys so much for your input. And then you have to take responsibility for it from that point forward. You can't keep going back and forth 10 times to try to make sure that you have, that everyone is super pleased with the outcome, because, you may have a range. Some people may feel like, wow, this is great. Others might feel like, well, I really wish we had done so and so. But that's just part of being in management, and it's something that you just kind of have to make a decision about and then just do it. Okay, beware of some job description pitfalls. One thing is setting the requirements bar too high. Look at your level of experience or your years of experience requirements and say, is this reasonable given the complexity level of the job and the relative ease or difficulty of filling the position? If you are looking for someone to be a retail clerk, you seriously probably do not need 5 years of experience to do that job. And so 5 years would be a bar too high for that. Do any of your educational requirements match the pay and sophistication of the job requirements? You need to make certain that you're not out of whack in requiring too much education for a job that just really doesn't require that. I don't know how many of you are maybe aware of this push, and I think even the state of Virginia did it, where a lot of states and big organizations have gone through and eliminated the college degree requirement for a lot of their jobs. And it just kind of makes access to those jobs easier for people who may be really good and have a lot of experience, but may not have that, paper that says they graduated from college. And so that's something that you might think about. Obviously, you have jobs that must have college degrees, engineers, accountants, teachers, doctors, that sort of stuff. Nurses, you can't waive that, and you wouldn't want to waive that, but just make sure that you're not overdoing it with the education. I remember I'm a boomer, and so I've been in the workforce for many, many years. And in the early 70s, when I was looking for a job, the market was flooded with all of the baby boomers graduating from high school and getting out of college. And it seemed like companies were requiring college degrees for everything. I can remember being very disheartened because I was a student at the time. I wanted to apply for a job as a receptionist, and that required a college degree. And so I know we're not in that position now, which is probably a good thing. A lot of you are probably scrambling to try to find talent. But anyway, it's just interesting how times change and how educational requirements change. All right, so are the job's essential functions accurately characterized? Just make sure that you're not throwing things into your essential functions that really are not essential functions. You may be on the fence legitimately for some of those, but anyway, just make certain that the essential functions are in fact essential. All right, then mind your jargon and your acronyms. Now, if you're using the model that I said that I preferred, which is to have one job description that you can share with applicants and employees, just be careful about the kind of jargon that you use. Like, for example, we who do HR, who specialize in HR, we have some shorthand jargon that we use. We might use employee engagement. We might talk about onboarding, and we all know what that means. But if you're going to put that in a job description, it might require a little explanation of what that is, particularly if you've got jargon. Sometimes you want people who understand that jargon because that means that they're experienced in the job you're looking for. But just be mindful of it is what I'm saying. Don't leave it out altogether, but just be mindful. Acronyms are the same way. In human resources, we use, HR. We talk about EAPs, we talk about FMLA or FMLA, we talk about the ACA, LWOP, leave without pay. If you're going to use any of those type of acronyms, my preference is in a job description or in an ad or whatever, that you spell that thing out the first time you use it, like you spell out the employee assistance program. And then from that point forward, if you use that again in that same document, EAP is fine, but don't leave somebody scratching their head saying, what does that even mean? Make your language inclusive and gender neutral. And an example of that would be, back in the day, everything defaulted to the masculine. Like you'd write a letter to an HR director and you didn't know who they were, and so you would say, "Dear Sir." So that would be something now you might say, "Dear Hiring Manager" instead. When it comes to inclusivity, you want to avoid things like talking about being energetic and a digital native and anything that might imply that you're looking for someone not old, that you're looking for somebody young and you might not want somebody older. Make sure the job title and the job description are harmonious. A bank I worked for years ago kind of had this joke where we jokingly let everybody pick their own job title. And of course, it was all in fun. It wasn't for real, but I can remember one of the bank tellers who actually really was a very good teller, who called herself the Supreme Commander of Financial Transactions. Don't do that officially on your job descriptions. Make sure that there's a harmony between the title and the description. All right, job descriptions need care and feeding, so you have to keep them updated. And like with a lot of things in HR, your job descriptions are not going to be static, probably. They need to be reviewed and updated at regular intervals. Some professionals say you should do this every year, which imagine. But that partly depends on your industry. If you have an industry that is not particularly dynamic, and I don't know if we have any accounting firms here, and I may be all wrong about this, but it would seem that accounting firms might not have a lot of changes in who does what. I'm certain they have rule changes every year. Certainly the IRS issues opinions, etc. But in terms of the job, who performs what job and who does what duty, you may not have a lot of changes. On the other hand, if you're a company that is highly technical, highly IT, that may be dynamic enough to really review your job descriptions every 6 months to a year, just to make sure you're keeping up. If you've shuffled people around, if you've reassigned, all of that triggers the need to update your job descriptions. So just kind of keep that in mind and figure out what might be appropriate for your industry and your company. And then I have a couple of slides about kind of caveats, things to be aware of. AI is all the rage these days. You've probably been hearing a lot about it. I think that China announced the new AI program called DeepSeek here recently that's causing a lot of kerfuffle. And so when it comes to recruiting, remember a couple of different things that are, in my opinion, really important. AI pulls from millions of documents, and in a positive way, it can help you consider all aspects of a job. So if you use an AI program and you go out there and say, write me a job description for a human resources manager, it may come back with really good information, some of which you might not have even thought about. So that's a positive in the AI column. The second thing is that AI can help you with wording and grammar, which is also a positive of AI. We have this program that we use called Grammarly, And I think every day I get my little Grammarly report that tells me how I did and how many words I've written and what percentage of the things have been correct and have I split too many infinitives and that sort of thing. So that's a positive. AI can provide you with model job descriptions. You can find ready-made job descriptions for almost any job you could imagine. So those three things are all positive. But here we get into the bewares. Some of the information that AI proves is just flat out inaccurate, and it may not even apply to your situation at all. Just this week, I did a query just through Google, and Google will give you an AI answer a lot of times on top, and then it'll give you other sources. But it gave, in one sentence, it negated its original premise. Originally, it told me that yes, this could be done, and then in one sentence later, it told me why it couldn't be done. So you got to be careful about that. And then it's just so important to remember that AI contains information that can be very useful, but AI has no human experience. It has no human experience in a job. And so it can pull facts and data, but right now, at least, it can't pull anything to do with experience on the job or probably anything meaningful. All right, so if you use AI as a tool, never lose sight of the fact that AI is a tool, and that's it. It's nothing more than a tool. Don't skip on the human oversight and judgment. And then remember, this is uppermost in your mind. A job description produced by AI is the starting point. It's not the ending point. Okay, you've got to totally take control of it and make certain that you've added what you need to add and that you've reviewed it, had another set of eyes review it, just to make sure that you're not getting yourself in trouble using computer generated work. All right, now I'm going to wrap up this particular section before we start talking for just a minute about the Fair Labor Standards Act. Here are some hazards of not having job descriptions. All right, so if you don't have job descriptions, I think that's probably handicapping you in hiring the brightest and best candidates. If you can't articulate to your upper level management, to your employees, and to your applicants what you're looking for, I think that can be a handicap. It can cause uncertainty among the employees as to who does what. How many times have we all heard and perhaps even said, "No, that's not in my job description"? Obviously, you can't list everything that an employee does in a job description. It would be very long and it would lose its meaning because you probably have things lumped together that don't go together. So having a job description can give more certainty about who is supposed to be responsible for what. No job descriptions can cause morale problems regarding perceived title and pay inequities. If someone questions, why is my title this? I know I make less money than this person. Why? And if you can't point to some objective standard or some objective reason, that can be a morale problem. And you'd hate to lose people simply because it was hard to justify a difference between two people's salaries or titles. Not having job descriptions makes it very hard to defend your hiring, firing, and pay decisions. And particularly if you got called on it by a disgruntled employee who felt like it was very unfair that you had fired them or not promoted them. If you don't have job descriptions, it can be really hard to defend those decisions. We've talked about accommodations a couple of times. No job description makes it really hard to determine what is and isn't a reasonable accommodation. Not having job descriptions makes it almost impossible to classify employees as exempt from overtime, and that's very important. And then it affects your company's ability to conduct fair performance evaluations. So I think all of those are good reasons to avoid negativity and to try to at least come up with a plan this year if you don't have job descriptions, or if you don't have, you've got them but they're old, to at least go through a review process to get yourself started on correcting that situation. All right, so now we're going to change gears for a second and talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act, and only in the context of exempt versus non-exempt employees. And by the way, if you have a question and you'd like to put a question in the questions box, feel free to do that. If I get some questions, I'll try to answer those. And then if I can't get to everybody's question, I can see who asked, and I can try to get back to you if I can find an answer for you. All right, so job descriptions and exempt employees. The Fair Labor Standards Act requires employers to pay most employees time and a half overtime under certain conditions and to pay most employees a minimum hourly rate. Some employees are going to be exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act overtime and minimum wage rules based on their job duties and their compensation structure. So that's kind of the underlying information on what's required, which of most jobs is going to be time and a half for most jobs. Some jobs are going to be able to be classified as exempt from overtime and exempt from minimum wage. So first of all, we have the categories, general categories of what jobs are most commonly considered exempt. And you're probably familiar with a lot of these. Now this exempt versus non-exempt thing is hugely complicated, and there's way more to it than we could possibly get into this afternoon. But here's just for an overview. I think this should all give you enough information to at least you can go back and look at your jobs if you're on the fence about something and be able to determine, yes, this is exempt, no, this is not exempt. All right, so you have your executive exemption, a professional exemption, an administrative exemption, computer employee exemption, and outside sales exemption. All right, so just to touch on each one of these kind of briefly, executive exemption is pretty much what it sounds like. You know, CEO, Chief Executive Officer, that's a high-level person who probably makes a lot of money, who probably has direct or indirect supervisory control over employees, and they have a lot of decision making, and they manage the business or they manage the department or that sort of thing. They also have the authority to hire and fire employees, or they have a lot of influence over those decisions. So that executive exemption is not really that hard to figure out. The professional exemption, again, depending on the nature of your business, is really divided into two categories. You have what's called learned professionals, and then you've got creative professionals. Learned professionals are those who have to possess knowledge that's in a field of science or learning. It must customarily be acquired by a prolonged course of specialized intellectual instruction. It must be intellectual in character, the job that they do, and include work requiring the exercise of discretion and judgment. For a creative professional, you're talking about employees generally in the arts fields, that they do work that requires invention, imagination, originality, talent, and that sort of thing in an artistic or similar type field. All right, the administrative exemption, that's one where I think people might get tripped up. Sometimes I've heard people say, well, I pay this person a salary, they're salaried. And I want to make clear that classifying someone as salaried does not determine whether they're exempt or non-exempt. Now, we're going to talk about the fact in a minute that, yes, there is a minimum salary requirement and there is a salary basis requirement, but simply paying someone a salary does not make them exempt. You can actually have almost every job I've ever been in full-time. I was a non-exempt person that got overtime, but I was paid a regular salary every payday, and then I got overtime on top of that. So anyway, the administrative exemption, I think, is someplace where employers sometimes make mistakes in classifying people as exempt. All right, if you're going to use the administrative exemption, that's an employee, again, who has to be compensated on the salary basis. And we'll talk about this again in a minute. Right now, that rate is $684 a week. So that's the minimum salary that you can pay somebody to be declared exempt, generally speaking. The employee's primary duty has to be the performance of office or non-manual work that is directly related to the management or general business operations of the employer. or the employer's customers, and the employee's primary duty includes the exercise of discretion and independent judgment with respect to high-level matters of significance. So that definition is probably the least clear of all the exemption definitions. That seems like there's some wiggle room in there. So anyway, just beware if you're using that administrative exemption. And I read you that directly from the Department of Labor's fact sheet. I believe it is 17A, fact sheet 17A. This gives you a lot of information on all the exemption categories. And you can just Google that, DOL exempt 17A, and you should get this fact sheet. They have all kinds of helpful fact sheets out there. All right, then you have computer professionals, and that's just generally speaking, if you're going to use an exemption and declare a computer employee exempt, it has to be at a pretty high level, like a network engineer, advanced learning in a field of science. Advanced learning, the systems analysis, and that sort of thing. If you have a computer employee who is a help desk person, that job may not be exempt because they may not be, the duties they're doing may not be exempt level duties. But again, each situation needs to be weighed on its own. The other category that I'm talking about today is outside sales, and that kind of speaks for itself. Employees who go outside of your facility, call on clients, make sales, bring in money. That's what they do. If they're standing behind a counter selling cosmetics or auto parts, they're probably not exempt, and they're probably not considered outside salespeople. So that's just a very, very quick overview of the exempt categories. All right, now we're going to talk for just a minute about the 3 tests. There are 3 tests to see if an employee is exempt, and generally speaking, we do have a couple of exceptions to this. Like you have highly compensated people that may not have to fulfill all 3 of these, but you're not going to encounter those people a lot, to be honest. So generally speaking, to classify somebody as exempt, they have to pass all 3 of these tests. Okay, it's not or, it's and. Test number 1 is an exempt employee has got to be paid a fixed salary no matter the quality or the quantity of their work. If an exempt employee performs any work during a week, generally speaking, the employee must be paid for the entire week. And so that may cause people to scratch their heads to go, quantity and quantity of work. It doesn't depend on that, and I have to pay them anyway. So let me give you an example. Let us say that you have a manager of a department, and that manager, and that your work week generally runs from Sunday through Saturday. Okay, but your office and your employees, for the most part, work Monday through Friday, like many people do. All right, so Sunday night, this manager, while she's watching football with her husband, is sitting there checking her emails. And so she's reviewing her emails, and she does this for a couple of hours, and then she quits reviewing. All right, so the next day she gets up and she's headed into work, and she has an automobile accident. And she's injured, and she has to go to the hospital for a couple of days, and then she's released to go home for the rest of the week. Okay, that employee, in all likelihood, is going to have to be paid her full $684 or more salary for that week, even though she only worked for 2 hours on Sunday night. Because she's an exempt employee, the quantity of her work does not disqualify her because she didn't work the whole week. Now, you can require her to use her paid leave during that week, okay? You can say this is going to come out of sick leave, but you cannot not pay her. If she's exhausted all her sick leave, you need to pay her for the whole week. So that's what it means by the quantity of the work. So if you have an employee, this doesn't mean that you can't discipline exempt employees. If somebody is, checking out early, if they're checking in late, if they're not doing a very good job, what you would do in that case would be address that as a performance issue. And I hope that makes sense. So yes, you can address that problem with exempt employees, but that would fall under employment. You can't just decide one day to stop, to not pay them. Now, as everything, there's a fact sheet that gives more detail about this, and there are situations, other situations where you can not pay them, but we just don't have the time to go into all that right now. But I just want to make you aware, generally speaking, you have to pay them their full salary for the week. Now, number 2 is the salary level. To be classified exempt, employees must generally be paid not less than $684 per week on a salary basis. Now, you may have heard recently, this has been in the news a lot recently, because what happened was in 2024, summer of 24, a new salary scale was put in that increased the minimum salary for exempt people. It did it in 2 increments. It started one, I think, on July 1st or somewhere in that neighborhood. And the second one was to take place January 1st of 2025. So from that 684, it bumped it up to a certain level, and then 1/1 of 25, it was supposed to bump it up to another level. Well, all of that was undone by a court in the fall. So you may have implemented that first bump if you had anybody in this situation. And technically now you don't have to pay them that highly, but that's an individual call to decide if you want to put them back to their $684 a week. But anyway, so, that is subject to change. It's possible that it will be changed again. Who has any clue if it, how much it's going to be? But for right now, it's $684. So that's test 2. And then test 3 is the duties test. We've already talked about the duties test for some of the exempt categories. 3 general requirements. They have to manage a department or the company itself. They have to regularly supervise at least 2 other employees, and they have to have the authority to hire, fire, or significantly influence those decisions. And that employee has to fulfill all 3 of those tests. So I hope that's been somewhat helpful if anyone on this call or on this webinar is on the fence about whether or not somebody's exempt or non-exempt. I hope that you find that helpful, and I hope you can see the connection between good job descriptions and classifying your employees properly, because you really don't want to get in trouble with the Department of Labor for not classifying people. And employers sadly try a lot all the time to try to pay somebody a lower wage and just call them exempt and say, oh, well, we're paying him a salary of $500 a week. And so that person is exempt from overtime because we're paying them a salary. And that is like, nope, not true. Yeah, I think that's everything I need to say right now about that. Some words to the wise. An employee who doesn't meet all these tests, I've said this how many times now, should not be classified as exempt. Paying an employee on a salary basis alone does not make an employee exempt. And remember that an exemption is not based on what the job description says, but on what the employee is actually doing. All right, so I have a quick example. I think I just got my time notice that it's 3 o'clock. Let's say you have a franchise for a chain. You own 6 franchises of a dollar store type organization. So you have 6 of these stores located in various geographic points across the state of Virginia. 5 of those are in urban areas where you've got a lot of people and a lot of traffic and a lot of sales volume. 1 of those is located in a smaller area out of town and, country type environment, fewer people, fewer employees. And each of those stores has a manager. And so they all have the same job description. They all manage the store. They manage the inventory. They hire and fire employees. They discipline employees. They do performance evals. They track the inventory. They handle the leak in the roof, all that stuff. But your 5 urban managers, that's what they do all day. They do those management level things most of the time. Your 6th store manager, because it's a smaller area, they don't have much turnover, so you're not hiring and firing very often. They have fewer employees. And so what you find with that manager is that manager, in fact, is waiting on customers 50% of the time during the day. When the inventory comes in, he's not delegating the stocking of shelves to other people. He's actually out there stocking shelves. So that could very well mean that you have 5 exempt managers and you have 1 non-exempt manager, because that non-exempt manager is doing mostly non-exempt work. So then that's, again, they have same job description, but they're doing different work. So I hope that's a good illustration of how somebody can be in the same job as another employee, but if they're not actually doing the same work, they could be, one could be exempt and the other not be exempt. Okay, remember that the way you structure your job classifications can support or undermine your classifications. So I am going to see if I have any questions. Sorry, my mouse died on me, so I'm having to use my keyboard. I'm sorry, I do appear to have a question. All right, do you need to be able to lift X pounds to be able to sit, stand, walk, stoop, etc.? I think that looks like one question. Sorry, my little question box is small. Okay, the answer to that is you can definitely have those requirements in a job, yes, because there are jobs where you do have to be able to do that. So what you have to do when you're doing your job analysis, you have to determine how often, how much, how many pounds would be necessary in order to be considered an essential part of this job. So if you're required to pick up something once a week that weighs 25 pounds and you have your employee has carpal tunnel and can't do that thing and said, hey, I need an accommodation, I can't lift that book, then what you would need to do that would probably be a reasonable request to say, once a week, can you get somebody else to move this for me? Once a week, another employee can do that. So that's where it's important to have a good job description that accurately reflects an essential function, and then make certain that your requirement is not unreasonable based on the job description. So for example, if a legal secretary needs to be able to lift a file box that weighs 25 pounds, don't put on your job description that this person needs to be able to lift 100 pounds. Don't make it an unreasonable requirement, because there's no need to do that. And so yes, you would get in trouble for overstating how much in order, and you can see where at times in the past, years ago, employers probably had requirements because they were trying to screen out certain groups of people. If you had an employer that didn't want any women working for them, you might have physical requirements that you knew excluded most women. Well, you don't want to do that. For one thing, it's bad for business, and for another, it's illegal now. And so, yeah, just make it realistic job descriptions. But yes, you can, if that is an essential part of that job, then yes, you may put that in the job description and make that as a requirement. Let's see, most of our job descriptions include a phrase similar to an additional duties as defined. Is this bogus? Oh, that's a really good question. No, actually, that's not bogus. You can have a sentence in there that says you may have additional duties assigned to you. What you need to just make certain of is that when you assign that additional duty, that again, that is just being in that category almost guarantees that would be moved into the non-essential column. If you can't even identify what the job, the assignment may be, or what the physical requirements might be, that's almost always going to mean that's a non-essential job duty. And so you would be able then to include that sentence, and you can probably just hum along in your business periodically asking people to do other stuff with no problem at all. But if you got into a situation with an accommodation and you had sort of, you asked somebody to do something that wasn't a standard part of the job description, and you just kind of forgot about it, some time went by, and then they ceased to be able to do that, but you hadn't incorporated that thing into the job description, that might be a little problematic for you because it still wasn't technically an essential part of the person's job. They've just sort of been doing it now. And I hope, I don't know if I'm making that clear or not, but I hope that that's understandable what I'm trying to say. Just make certain that you don't use that catch-all category to, discriminate against somebody for some reason. Let me see if I've got, I think that's all of my questions. Oh, wait, nope, I have a question about commissions. Okay. Oh, now I don't know if I can answer this question. Hold on one second. All right, the question rate outside and inside sales. Okay, to be outside sales, must the employee travel outside the office 50% of the time? Now, I'll be honest, I just read something today in preparation for this. Actually, I Googled it. I asked my friend Google, not about outside sales, but about percentages of time that an employee needs to spend in doing doing exempt work in order to be considered exempt. And the answer that I got from, I think was a good source, said there's no express percentage assigned, but this was not relative to actual specifically outside sales. So I do not know the answer, and I don't. All right, I'm not seeing the asker's name, but I believe, no, I am seeing the asker's name. Yeah, let me see what I can find out, and I'll send you a fact sheet on that. And are all inside people non-exempt? Because they make commission, are they? Yeah, that's a more complicated question than I can answer off the top of my head. One of the beauties of the Fair Labor Standards Act is, yeah, if you're an expert in that, you have quite a skill set because it's hard without resources to answer some questions. So anyway, I will, the person that asked that question, I will see what I can find and get that back to you. So I hope that you have found this to be somewhat useful, and I hope that you were able to follow along and that it kept your interest. And I really thank you so much for participating. It's always a pleasure for me to deal with our clients. It's one of the highlights of my day is when I get client calls, and even if there's a problem and we're trying to troubleshoot something, it's always a pleasure to try to act and function in that capacity. I really enjoy helping people, and I look forward to the 2025 and hope that you have a successful year. And if you need anything, here's my email. Feel free to shoot me an email, and we will get this information out to you by recording and by slide. So I hope you have a lovely week, rest of your week, and I hope to talk to you sooner or later. Thanks so much.